Hello. Today I want to take you through something I've wanted to do for some time, and that is a debugging type workshop. I've got on screen here an expert advisor. It's actually just drawing a trend line, but you can see it's drawing a single or almost single vertical or very close to vertical line. I'm actually recording this introduction after I've fixed the problem. So I received a question on our Discord server just a few days ago, someone asking for help with this problem, and I thought this is a good opportunity to take that code and show how I go through the debugging steps. So I'm actually recording this introduction after I've fixed the problem, and so I can show you on this chart, this is how it should look. There should be an upper and a lower trend line, kind of channeling the price here. But before fixing the problem, it's like this. So I'm going to go into the editor soon, and well, I've already been in the editor, but soon you're going to see the video of me going into the editor before I've even found the problem, and I'm just going to go through all the steps to identify what's gone wrong and then fix it. And so this, as I said, this introduction is being recorded after the problem is fixed. I'm going to be taking the steps of debugging very slowly, piece by piece. Normally I make some kind of mental adjustments and I jump through a few steps, but I'm going to try to do just one step at a time so that you can see the technique. And this is not necessarily the best way to debug for every possible problem, but it's a good first step where I simply show basically the diagnostics. And when I eventually get to the problem, it's kind of obvious once I've got those diagnostics there. So I hope this will be useful to you. Let's get into the editor now. Now I have the Metatrader 4 editor open, and that's because the expert that was sent to me is a Metatrader 4 expert, so .mq4 here. I have placed the code into a folder called original, and I've made a copy in a folder called debug, and that's because I just want to make sure I keep a copy of the original. It's not something you need to worry about if you're actually doing your own debugging. I'm just doing this so that if I make some kind of mistake, I can always go back and compare this with the original here. The expert also came with 2 include files, which I've placed also into Orchard Original and Orchard Debug, and these at the moment are exact copies, so the debug folder has exactly the same files as the original file. I haven't made any changes there. I am in Metatrader 4 simply because that was the expert that I was sent, but the techniques that I'm going to show are kind of general how-to techniques, and you can apply them also to Metatrader 5. At this stage, I don't know what the problem is. The introduction that you've probably just seen hasn't been recorded yet. I'm going to work my way through the debugging and then record the introduction later and paste that back into the beginning in the video editor. So just to show the problem, I'm actually going to compile this regression lines in the original folder, run that in Metatrader, and show you that I have the problem. I will say I have already made one small change though, and that's simply because I've placed these files into this Orchard original folder, so I have changed the include statements so that that works. I compile, I've got no errors on the compile. Now if I go to Metatrader, here is my original regression lines. I drag that onto the chart. I'm not going to change any of the inputs, I'll leave all of those as they are. Okay, and here we see a almost vertical line. I can see there a slight jagged edge, which looks like the line has a slight slope to it. Now this is a 1-minute chart, and that is what the original problem was sent to me with. So I've tried it on the 1-minute chart here. I can see that I have a line there, and what I expect this expert will be doing is to draw lines above and below in kind of a channel type approach. I'll just make an observation before I go into any further debugging. I was sent this, and what I was sent is an expert. If the intent is just to draw these trend lines or this channel once only and then exit, which appears to be what the expert is doing, then I would say a script is a better way to write that kind of code. If the intent is to have these lines update constantly as new bars are formed on the chart, then an indicator might be a better way to go. The expert that I received has no actual code in there to place any kind of trade or modify any trades, so experts should be reserved for trading, but perhaps this is just the beginning of someone writing an expert. But I'm not going to change this. I don't think that's causing any problems, whether this is an expert, a script, or an indicator. I don't think that's the cause of the problem. So for the time being, I'm not making any changes to that, and I'll just fix this as an expert. So looking down into the journal tab first, I can see that the expert was loaded and there are no error messages here. In the experts tab, I can also see that it was loaded. I can see the inputs, and again, no errors there. It should have drawn 2 lines. I'm going to right click on the chart here and go to the objects list, and there are the 2 lines. I'll just click list all. So there are no hidden objects on screen, and they are trend lines, lower trend line and upper trend line. I'm just going to look at the properties of that upper trend line. I can see that it has a first time and a second time, which a trend line should have, and that those 2 times are 50 minutes apart. So 2:34 to 3:34. And if I'll just cancel that quickly and look at the properties of the expert. I can see that it has a length of 50, and I'm assuming that means that the trend line should go 50 bars back. So 50 minutes, 50 bars on a 1 minute chart. Cancel that. Going back to the objects again, looking at the upper line. So these 2 times seem to be right. I should have an endpoint, and when it was drawn, this bar was the endpoint. I should have an endpoint here, but then I should have another point that's 50 minutes to the left of that, and I have an almost vertical line. But if I look at these values, I can see that I'm going from a low value of 97 at the start point 50 minutes ago to a high value of 147 now. And maybe that's the reason. Perhaps this line does go all the way back for 50 minutes, but it's going so far in a vertical direction that it looks like an almost vertical line. So I think the times are right. They seem to match with the inputs, but these values are wrong. I might change that. So this is the beginning point at 97 and value 147. If I look at the prices showing on the chart at the moment, 146, 147 seems about right. I'm just going to change that to maybe a 145. So it's still quite a steep line, but it's better. So this seems to be the problem, that the values are wrong, not that the times are wrong. So I'll just leave that for the moment. We'll go back to the editor and I'll actually start the debug process. Now I'm going to close this and reopen the copy that's in my debug. So now I've opened the copy that's in the debug, and I've already changed this include line to include the debug version of these include files, just in case the problem that I find is in there. It's Metatrader 4 and it has property strict, which is a good thing. I'll mention a little bit of history. Metatrader 4 was originally when Metatrader 4 originally was released, the compiler had a different syntax to it. It allowed some flexibility in the language that really shouldn't be there because it led to errors in the coding, and it also caused certain runtime errors to be ignored. So things like an array index out of bounds might be ignored in the older version. Metaquotes updated that to a new version syntax, but because there was already code out there that used the old version, they couldn't simply break all of that code. So this property strict compiler directive was introduced. If that exists in the code, then the code is compiled with the new version of the syntax, and if that doesn't exist, then the code is compiled with the old version syntax. Now you should always be using property strict. If you pick up a piece of code that's old and doesn't use it, I recommend one of the first things you should do is to update that code so that you can use property strict, because not having property strict will mean that certain runtime errors are simply ignored and other things simply don't work the way they really should. If you're using Metatrader 5, it has always had the new version syntax because it was released later. But including this property strict in a Metatrader 5 code won't cause any harm. It's just ignored by the Metatrader 5 compiler. So maybe it's not a bad idea to just have this in your code always, and that way you don't forget about it. If you use the wizard to generate this code, then it will already be put there by default through the Metatrader 4 wizard. Okay, so this already has property strict, so I know that there are no runtime errors that are being hidden by the old version compiler. I'm going to start adding some debug statements. And the key to the debugging, let me go back to Metatrader, is to work backwards. And you saw that I started here with looking at the results and investigated what those lines are on the screen. So I'm working backwards from the end result back to the beginnings of the code. Now, because I'm inserting debugging statements and I don't always want them to be there and don't always want them to run, I'm going to introduce another declaration here, or another define. So if I use this hash define debug, then anywhere in the code that I insert debugging statements, I can simply wrap them in a hash if def. And that way, if I turn this off later, those lines simply don't get compiled, and it's an easy way of removing them from the code. So by working backwards, I'm going to find the point where those lines are actually drawn on the screen first. I can see here that in the onInit, and remember I said this is an expert, but it doesn't actually do anything on a regular basis. So in the onTick section of this expert, there's nothing. All of the work happens in the onInit, which is why this is probably a better candidate for a script. But if regression line, so we've done all the work to determine that there is a regression line, and then it calls draw trend. If I right click on that and go to definition, here is draw trend, which takes the name of an object, and there's an upper line and a lower line, and then the two values. And it's using the inputs of the start and the length. Let me go back to Metatrader just to show you. On the expert properties, there's a start, which is defaulting to 1, and a length, which is defaulting to 50. So it's calculating an end bar. I've passed in the name and the two values, and what it's trying to do is, with this object create, it's trying to create that trend line. It is a type object trend, so that's correct. And it's going from time 1, value 1, until time 2, value 2. Okay, so I'm going to insert a debug statement here. So by having this hash if def debug and hash end if, anything in between these two will only be included in the compile if I have defined that debug statement, which you've seen that I've just done. What I want to do now is print the values of end bar, just to make sure that that is what I think it is, and then print these two times and the values. Now, I've looked at it on the screen and I've seen what the times and the values are. I want to make sure that nothing is happening after this statement that changed those values, because what I'm seeing is the final result there. I just want to make sure at this point that I'm actually asking for the line to be drawn the way I'm seeing it on the screen. And then I can track back and find why I might have incorrect values. But just in case these are being set correctly and then there's another statement that I haven't found, I'm just going to print these at this point. Now I'm using the print format statement, which is like a combination of the print and string format statements together. It has certain placeholders. So the first argument to this is the template string. And I'm going to print the end bar, which is an integer. So a %i is an integer placeholder. This %s, I'll come back to that in a moment. So I've got the end bar. I'm going to print the time as a string. I'm printing the value as a floating point, %f. So that's my template string, %s. So in this %s, I'm actually going to print the signature of the function so that I know where I am when this happens. It's just common practice for me that I print that, and it just helps to identify in case I have multiple print format statements in the code, which I might have by the time I finish this. I know exactly where this one came from. So I've got %s, and I'll put the arguments on a second line to make them a little bit easier to see. So funcsig, so this This is a double underscore and a trailing double underscore. func sig is function signature, and it will print that in this %s placeholder. So that's the first argument. The second argument is the end bar. The next argument is this itime, so I'll just copy that statement. Good idea to copy it rather than retype it, because that way I know that I'm not introducing a second error. And I want to convert that time to a string so that I can print it in this string placeholder here. I'm not worried about the formatting too much, so I'm just going to use a simple string conversion there. And then I want value 1. Just go to another line, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the second time. I'll just copy that. Second time, and value 2. So now that's going to print all of the relevant values just before it draws the object, and I can actually compare them to the values on the screen. This, as I said, is an expert, not a script or an indicator. So if I simply recompile this, it's going to go and redraw on the screen automatically. So what I'll do before I recompile it, I'll just clear the experts and the journals tab. And that way any messages here I will know have come from the new run. Then I compile. So I'm still getting a near vertical line here. I can see that the end bar is 50. And I'm getting this printed twice because remember there's an upper and a lower line, and I've put this statement inside the draw trend. So I've got a start time, time 1 of 2:49, and an end time of 3:39. So that's 50 minutes, exactly what I expected. It's actually 51 minutes. I have a value 1 of 97.73 for the lower and 97.806 for the upper, and the value 2 at 147 and 147.80. So I'm still getting the same values here, and I know that nothing is changing these lines after they've been drawn. I'm probably taking a few steps in this debugging session that I might shortcut. If I simply looked at things, I might just move on. But since I'm trying to show you how to work through the debugging, I'm going to be going step by step rather than take the shortcuts. All right, so at this point I know that the lines aren't being changed after I draw them, and it really looks like value 1 and value 2 are simply incorrect. So I know they're being passed in from this draw trend statement. Here it is. And draw trend is getting this from the trend.upperValueAt and the trend.lowerValueAt. So let's go and look at the upper value at. They both appear to be wrong, so I'm going to just start with one of them. And I'm looking at the linear trend base here. I've just simply clicked on upper trend value at or upper value at, go to definition, and I get a choice of possible options here. In general, the smaller line number would be the simple definition of the function, and then you can see here the higher line number, 992, actually has the code in here because it's got the class name : So this is where I want to go to see what's actually happening. But you can also see there's this second set, and that's because the function's being overridden or overloaded. One of these function arguments takes a date time and the other takes an index. This is just getting a 0, so I'm looking for the lines with an index only. So this is this line 88, C linear trend base, upper value at, const int index. So I'll go there. And I can see all this is doing is returning a value from a simple value at function, passing that index, and then m upper trend. So m upper trend must have been calculated somewhere, and it's a global variable inside the class. The error could be in value at, or it could be in the upper trend initially. But I'm going to go to value at, which is where this is being used. Go to definition, index, and the trend object. And this is the declaration, and here where the class name is included, that's where I want to go. So I'm here at value at. I've got an offset, a value, and just looking at this, I can already see where the problem is, but I'm going to go through the steps to identify it before I fix the problem. So I know this is returning a value. I think that is not being changed on the way through, but just in case, I'm going to add a print statement here. I am taking this step by step just so that you can see all these things happen. So I'm going to recompile this now. In the experts tab, I've got the messages from the draw trend, which shows me the end bar and the time and the values. And I can see here from the value at function, I'm getting 97.74, which is 97.74 and 147.74. So that value coming from this value at function isn't changing on the way through. Okay, so back to the value at function. Value is coming from this statement, value equals trend-based.price plus trend-based.slope. So this is a standard slope function. The value at any point along a straight line is the standard formula y equals mx plus b. So the base price is the starting price, and then we're multiplying the slope by an offset. And I can immediately see here, this is plus offset. So offset is the number of bars that I want to be offset by, and that should be a multiply. So what I've done here in tracking back, I've gone back as far as this point, I've printed the value, I know that everything works, and here I can simply see the error. If I wanted to go back further, then it would mean that something in this trend object is incorrect, and I would take this a step back and a step back until I eventually find the place where this isn't working. Now you may choose that you want to go through the debugger and actually run this. Sometimes that's the best way to go, but it is very tedious stepping line by line through the code until you get to where you want to be and then just watching values. I find it faster for some types, or for many of my debugging exercises, to go backwards like I have done here. And as I mentioned a couple of times, I would have been here much sooner, but I've been taking everything step by step to show you the technique. Anyway, I've made this one fix now, multiplied by offset. I'm going to go back. I'm going to actually remember to clear these this time. And then I'm going to recompile regression lines, and that should cause the expert to rerun. And this looks much better. Let me just see, this would have drawn, it's a 1 minute chart, so it may have ticked over, but if I start there and go back to the beginning, it's 50 bars, it's the right length, so it's beginning back here at number 50, and I have the two lines that look like this is what this is meant to do. So that was the entire problem, that I have this linear trend base. The entire problem was just that plus instead of a multiplication. It's a really simple thing to do, to type a simple typo like that, press the wrong character. And I tracked back to it by following through these print statements to make sure that I had the right values that I was expecting, until I got to a point here where I knew that that was just an incorrect value, and so I had to look at the way that I was calculating that, and I saw that this is the error. Now I'll go back and remove these debug statements. I could, of course, just search for them all, but it's much easier to do that, and that way if I find that a problem comes up again, I can simply turn it back on and all those statements are still there. But now that I've done that, I will, just to show that that works, I'll clear these again, recompile, and now if I go back in the experts, all I get are the standard messages of the expert, the original one being removed, and the new expert loaded, and nothing in the journal. So I've hidden all of those debugging statements, and everything seems to be working. So that's a very quick run through the debugging process. The important things are to check the outputs that you have, know the values that you've received on that output, and then work backwards through the code, adding those kind of debugging statements, showing the relative, and then work backwards through the code, showing those debugging statements with the key values that are affecting what the output is. until you eventually get to a point where you can find that something's going wrong. This is just one of the techniques. Different types of problem may not be quite so easy to resolve, but this is a good example to start with, and this is the first step you should take. When something's not working, print the values that should be there and just make sure they are what you expect them to be. So I hope this has been useful to you. If it has, click the like button, click subscribe if you want to see more of our videos. So until next time, thank you for watching.